So thank you, Raven, Bauer, Durham, and James Wolfe for joining this fine late summer afternoon to talk about your music and your contributions to the upcoming Fuzzy Panda Recording Company Cicada compilation titled Tymbal. Comes out September 28th. So Raven, thank you. I want to ask you about sort of your approach to music generally and sort of what sort of aims or goals you have when you go into it. And if you could take me through like the process of you sort of developing a track.
Okay. Well, with this, I definitely wanted to like narrow things down into certain characters so that I could have these different elements that could be, different and would create a dynamic. I definitely like discover what I make in the process, kind of finding something I really like, one moment at a time.
You typically you play guitar, you play banjo, I mean, you play a bunch of instruments, right?
Yeah, I do a lot of multi-instrumental stuff.
But do you ever work just from a set of samples? Because in this compilation, you were given, I think 4 hours of essentially pink noise of cicada recording. Were you able to? Had you worked in that similar environment before, or is this a new thing for you? And yeah, if you could elaborate on that too.
Yeah, no, it's sort of a new approach for me. I usually end up recording with my instruments mostly, but with this, I loved having like the limitation of having these different characters that I got to be familiar with and to
And so,
find some emotional narrative to it.
Okay, that makes sense because your track definitely has a sort of dynamic flow to it. Now, when you were listening to the samples, when you were figuring out what to use, did you drill down into like the individual sounds or sort of accept the broader cacophony, for lack of a better term?
Yeah, I definitely narrowed them down, like put an EQ on it so that one particular character would be present in each one. I think I used probably 3/4 of the recordings that you sent me. So
oh wow, okay.
Bits and pieces of each one. Yeah.
That's very cool. And so James, similar question for you about like your general approach to music and how do you approach a track, and then how was this different or similar, and what your approach was with this track?
Well, with this one, I mean, my general approach to music is, I think, either some amount of composition or improvisation, sometimes a little bit of both, depending on how I frame the idea of what it is I'm going to do. But I usually, if I'm going to go into any situation and I know it's going to happen beforehand, I'll want to create some kind of composition. And that could be a very loose outline of form, or it could be certain more detail in different parts of the form. But it's about creating beginning, middle, or a couple middles, and an end kind of structure. And so whatever usually I perform, I create these compositions to be played live. But I have done in the past some assembling of sort of sounds, of more abstract sounds, and using basically a DAW and putting it together that way. But I didn't want to do that with this time. I figured that was sort of the obvious thing, or the usual thing to do would be to do this all through a computer with particular samples. But what I decided to do this time was to take 3 or 4 samples. I may have only used 3 samples in this whole thing, or 3 segments or recordings of the that sounded different enough, that had both a certain basic pitch or pitch area that they hung around in, and another sonic character where there are other kinds of noise, or where they tended to go. And so I chose 3 different ones, one very high pitched, one very low with lots of bird noise, and I think one that was almost all bird noise. So I really just, I based it on as 3 different instruments basically I could use. And what I did is I put that through my pedal board that I usually use to do my live performance. And so I improvised with a little bit of planning, a short live performance using those 3 samples and my usual gear. So that's how I did this one.
So that sort of brings up a question then for you, Raven, which is, how did you make your track? Were you using your effects rig, or were you, sampling in the computer? What was your process there?
I did it mostly just through a computer. Like as soon as I got the tracks, I thought, oh, I really want to put an EQ on them and just try and bring out natural sounds more or less, but just have them isolated. But yeah, it's fun to work with the limitation of it though.
Very cool. And yes, then there's the other limitation of time. I think there was only about 2 weeks to put together a track.
Yeah.
So now going back, because you two have collaborated a fair amount, and you didn't collaborate on this, and I may not have made it clear that you could have, but I apologize.
Oh, no, we thought about it and we decided to do it a
Yeah.
separate thing. We were both kind of working on different projects at the time, our individual projects. So we thought, well, let's just keep in that mode and do this one separately.
I think we initially got very different impressions of what we wanted to do.
Yeah. So we just, it makes sense.
That's fair, especially since, Raven, you did it mostly sort of in a computer, and then James, you took it sort of through your rig, and
Yeah.
which each approach has its own set of limitations.
Yeah.
So can you talk a bit more about your collaborations in the past, and sort of what your process is there? Because when I think I've seen you guys play together only once at Dwell about 2 years ago today, I think.
That's about right. That's right.
And it was very much live instrumentation, looping, and creating this really lovely ambient sort of drone mix with some string melodies on top. And so I don't know if that's what you're still doing. Obviously, live music hasn't been much of a thing the past 2 years, but if you could talk about what your approach is when you play together, and what your goals are when you do so.
I think we've always been totally improvised, more or less. We've done a little bit of song composing, but mostly just finding what's there when we sit down to play.
Yeah.
Um,
When we first met in a band, we just sort of immediately noticed that we were sort of speaking a very similar language in improvisation. So we would just sort of start. That's how we, started making music. Was, oh, let's just do a duo thing, promote and see what happens.
It's very clear when listening to was it the River and the Rain in It, I believe, most recent one I listened to, where you two are playing together, where you clearly are speaking the same language, and it's really interesting and cool to. We'll see. Is it? I see you've got a guest interview subject there,
yeah.
jumping around.
Yeah. Homer.
That's Homer. Yeah.
Cool. Homer, you said, like the epic writer,
Sure. Yeah.
Or The Simpsons.
or on The Simpsons. Sorry.
Yeah.
I like to think it's the epic writer.
Okay. It's the epic. Okay, it is the epic. He's Raven's cat, but he's adopted me. So.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah. That's always good. So with this album, I mean, I know both of you enjoy spending a lot of time outdoors. I'm sure you heard a lot of cicadas firsthand going on hikes in the area. Were you thinking at all when you were writing about the temporal nature of these cicadas, or sort of the environmental challenges they face? For example, the more asphalt we lay around the area, the fewer places the cicadas can come out of the ground every 17 years. Did that come up at all, the periodicity of it?
I think directly in writing it, not necessarily. Like, I didn't structure it in any way that way, but I think about it a lot. I'm a gardener and I interact with especially suburban landscapes here, and thinking about it a lot. And I feel like whatever resonates with me, if I'm creating something, it has something to do with everything I've been thinking about. So.
Very cool. How about you, James?
Me, not so much. I think I was like, I guess when I was performing with the improvisation with those sounds, my thought was more to focus on the cicadas' experience right then and there. There's sort of their both desire to make noise and the sort of the sexual thing that was, just sort of make a picture of what they're doing right in that moment. So I was really more focused on that.
Cool. So sort of moving away from the compilation, are you working on any other projects right now, or considering playing live anytime soon?
I'm working on putting an album together, and I really haven't performed or written much in the last year. So I'm like ready to put something out and then see what comes after that.
And will that album be mostly improvisational, or will it be structured?
Most of it are pieces that I've written, a lot of home recordings from pieces I've written for shows. So long form, there's two, 12 and 20 minutes.
Oh, very cool.
And I just had a record come out earlier this month, and so it's a double CD, and so that was sort of a nice closure of a certain chapter for me musically. And I have done one live performance since then. It was actually a piece that I wrote thinking about cicadas a lot. I sort of wanted to incorporate or create a kind of cicada sound
Oh, cool.
for what I was doing, and hopefully it was performed outdoors, and I wanted ideally for it to mix with the cicada sounds in performance.
Where did you play?
And Zero Moon, the Zero Moon house. Yeah. So it was really a lovely kind of environment to play into.
We
But
almost had Jeff on this compilation.
oh yeah.
Yeah.
There you go. So, but I guess mostly I've been playing just to try to play acoustic and sort of keep my acoustic playing up. I've been collaborating with some people, with like a Jason Molinax on his last couple records.
Yes.
And he's been putting out a lot of records both this last year.
He has. I think he put out 3 or 4 in the past year.
Yeah, 4. He was going for 4 and he made it. And now he's got another one that we recorded in one day. A bunch of Rich O'Meara, me, Nick, I can't remember his last name now, but and a bass player, Logan. And we just took a whole day and we sort of did these sort of planned on the spot improvisations and had a great time.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Are there is there anything else you'd like to share about sort of your process or the compilation?
No, I'm really curious to see what other people are doing, you know.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, some of them I know, like Chester, and I know his music really well, but others I don't know. So I'm really, excited to see what sort of variety and what similarity there are just because of the sound source,
It's so I've had the privilege of listening to it all already, but it's been really cool hearing sort of and I tried to articulate this with Chester, and I did, I think, a poor job, but the way that we're all individuals, right, and coming up with our own way of approaching music. And despite that, with maybe a couple of exceptions, we split into several groups that travel together. And so it's very cool to hear, even though, for example, I would say your two tracks are kind of similar, and in a lot of ways, compared to, we've got a track like Chester's track has a sort of very rhythmic, pulsing, high pitched aspect to it that kind of matches with this gentleman Adam, who's on the compilation too, and his track is it's traveling a similar sonic landscape. It's not identical in a way, but it's really cool to hear that, and to hear the different approaches. Like some folks went drone, some folks went noise. One person decided to do a techno track, and it's awesome. It's the last track on the album, and it's
I was wondering if that was going to happen. Yeah.
Kind of violated the drone aesthetic that of the limitation, but it's a good track, and he dug down into the individual samples to get a kick drum, a snare, a hi-hat. So it's kind of cool. Well, thank you both so much. I'm after this part of the interview, what will happen is I'll play Raven's track first, Untitled, and James, your track, X Minor, so folks can give a listen.
Okay, so, awesome.
Thank you both for joining.
All right, thanks a lot.
All right, take care.
You too.